you go to the movies as a kid? And if you did, were there any films or filmmakers that were particular favorites or influences for you?
I did go to the movies as a kid, but I think, and the films that made probably the biggest impact were probably things like Star Wars and E.T. and the big sort of commercial icons of that period. But I mean, I think I really got my film education on television. On BBC television, they used to run a strand of the sort of great world cinema, and I learnt about most of the classic movies by seeing them on TV. So I think I saw The Godfather trilogy on television. I got my initial education in Scorsese and Ingmar Bergman and Tarkovsky and Truffaut. And it's just one evening a week on BBC Two. They would just run another classic movie, and I used to videotape them on VHS because they were probably too late for my bedtime. And that was ironic that I got my film education from television, and therefore in some ways I've always thought the best TV I've ever seen is those films.
Yeah.
So when I started to make TV, I never felt that there was a different way of shooting films and TV, because I thought, well, the best television I've ever seen are those movies on TV.
Well, I always ask if there was sort of a turning point when you knew you wanted to be a filmmaker, and I've read actually in preparing for this about a certain book that you came across, and I hope you could tell the story. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to have a teacher at school called Roger Mortimer, who was used to be an actor with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he put on a play a year which I was casting the chorus of, and he taught English, he taught acting, and I got the whole drama and theatre bug, and then began to kind of think, if I'm not getting a lead part in a school of 300, maybe I shouldn't be an actor. It wouldn't be a smart move. And at the same time, I was very drawn to his world, the backstage world, and it was literally just been walking through the school hall one day and seeing a book lying on the piano, which is a library book about how film and TV is made, and I basically smuggled it into my bag and took it home, and that I read it cover to cover, and the next morning I was converted.
Sure. So what were the initial steps for you? Obviously, I guess getting started is the hardest thing, maybe.
Yeah, I spent a year reading anything I could get my hands on, and I think the best thing I read was a book by Harris Watts called On Camera, which was the training manual for graduate BBC trainees who were learning how to be, film and television makers. And after a year, I thought, well, I don't want to be one of those guys who just reads about it. I want to make films, so I started researching whether I maybe bought a second-hand Super 8 camera, and I was about to do that, and I discovered my uncle had an old Clockwork 16mm camera, a Bolex camera in his attic, from the early 60s, when 16mm was an amateur gauge briefly, so he had a couple of lenses and this Clockwork camera, so I borrowed that from him. He kindly lent that to me, and I got 100 for the Kodak film and started there.
You mentioned BBC, and if I have my information correct, that was some of your earliest stuff was there in terms of TV and series and leading into the TV films that you ended up doing. But I just wonder if you could talk about the value of having worked in TV in turn for when you later would make television films and then feature films.
I started, in my teenage years I made films that I wrote and directed. Then I did a great apprenticeship in my early to mid 20s in English TV, and I directed EastEnders, which is a very long-running soap opera there, which has always been high quality. And really, the amazing training was to learn how to shoot that fast. So when you're having to shoot 16 minutes of finished television drama in a 10-hour day without a minute of overtime, it's the hardest thing I've ever done technically. I mean, nothing comes close to doing 16 minutes multi-camera where you're editing it as you shoot it. And it's real sink or swim. If you can get through that, you'll never be as stressed by a shooting day in your life again. And even on a film like The King's Speech, there was not a lot of time, and I was often up against it. And you learn techniques about how to get yourself out of a hole, about how to manage time, how to pick up time if you're behind. And to this day, I still draw on some of those secret shortcuts.
Can you just, for people who maybe haven't pieced together, connected the dots of all of the great, particularly HBO movies that you've been responsible for, just how did that string of things start? And just maybe you can reel them off, and I can do it as well.
No, sure. I think my HBO relationship really started thanks to Helen Mirren. I directed Prime Suspect with Helen Mirren, and then Helen asked me to direct her in Elizabeth I, which we made for HBO, which starred Jeremy Irons and Hugh Dancy and Helen. And then I made Longford for HBO with Jim Broadbent, Samantha Morton, Andy Serkis. Then John Adams with Paul Giamatti, Laura Linney, produced by Tom Hanks. And those shows won the Golden Globe for Best TV or film or miniseries 3 years in a row. And for the actors, Helen Mirren, Jeremy Irons, Paul Giamatti, Laura Linney, Jim Broadbent, Sam Morton all won the Golden Globe. So I had a great sort of run for 3 years with HBO doing that work. And then I went back to England and did a very low budget after the huge budget. John Adams, a very low budget Peter Morgan script called The Damned United, starring Michael Sheen, and then The King's Speech.
One thing I noticed when you look at all of those is that there's sort of an interest in the history and the social, cultural history, I guess, of England in different ways, totally different aspects, but just, and I wonder, is that a conscious thing? Do you like to explore different aspects of the...
I'm very interested in I think, exploring iconic characters and what they reflect back to us about national identity. So, in the case of John Adams, I had this opportunity to say, is it possible to chase this schism in political values that exists in this country back to the personalities of the founders, and particularly looking at Adams and Jefferson, and looking at the creation story of the United States and how it connected, I suppose, to political consciousness now. And then, with the King's Speech, I suppose in some ways I'm looking at why the monarchy has remained through telling the story of the Queen's father, and because in some ways understanding his story gives you a better understanding about, I suppose, the popularity of the monarchy, because I think King George VI did a lot to make the monarchy popular, because I suppose he wasn't some, incredibly privileged, affluent guy living a life of propriety. He was a guy who suffered to be king, suffered to even speak to the nation, and I think that suffering people found very poignant.
And I guess stayed through the war in Buckingham and all that. But if someone was to say, what are the telltale signs? Are there certain commonalities of a Tom Hooper production? What would you say? Do you see anything in common that, whether it's stylistically or?
I think if you look at the relationship between the Damned United and the King's Speech, close observers will notice there were some compositional ideas I've begun to explore in the Damned United that I definitely carried on in the King's Speech, particularly this idea of hunkering characters down in the bottom corners of frame and using a lot of headroom and off-kilter compositions and my use of the 18mm lens. So there's definitely a stylistic thread running through both pictures. I think in John Adams, the link is almost, having done a little bit, period work with Elizabeth I, with a lot of Steadicam and Love and Cold Climate that I shot quite classically. In John Adams, I wanted to go to the other extreme and shake it up, and I had a lot of handheld and a lot of very rough camera work and a lot of Dutch tilts and a lot of shots where the horizon line was off, and so that stands in a relationship. But I definitely think there's a linking theme in terms of attention to realist detail and obsession about capturing the period, whether it's present or near present or past. And there's definitely a linking theme in terms of how much I gravitate towards very strongly character-driven work, where there's really fascinating characters for great actors to explore.
With our remaining time, I just hope I can hone in on the King's Speech, just particularly.
Sure.
I gather that there's a neat story involving your mother of how the material actually came to your attention, and I wonder if you can share.
Sure. My Australian mother, Meredith, who lives in London with my English father, she was invited late 2007 by some Australian friends to make up a token Australian audience in a fringe theatre play reading of an unproduced, unrehearsed play called The King's Speech. She's never been invited to a play reading in her life before. She almost didn't go because it didn't exactly sound very promising, but thank God she did, because she came home, rang me up and said, "You're not going to believe this, Tom, but I think I found your next film." And I'm worried the story. Listen to it.
So that was Seidler's play.
Yeah, that was late 2007.
And so now, how did you then go about making it actually come together?
I worked with David on adapting to the screenplay at the same time. My wonderful producer Ian Canning had optioned it, the play, in terms of its film rights, and so we began to work together to cast it and get it financed, and I worked with David to adapt it into a screenplay.
And obviously, just as important as anything is the other people who were involved. And I want to ask, just how did that come together? I know there was sort of many, a lot of work went into making it possible, so that like Helena and Jeff and everybody. And I wonder if you can just you know.
Well, Jeffrey Rush came to the script in quite as unlikely a way as I did. The same theatre script was delivered in a brown paper envelope like some orphaned child to his Melbourne doorstep one Christmas morning, because a runner who worked for the English Fringe Theatre Company happened to know was Australian and happened to know his street address. Had an unsolicited note saying, "Dear Mr. Rush, you don't know us, we're a small theatre company, will you do our play?" Unbelievably, he did not throw it in the bin.
Yeah.
He read it and he rang his agent and said, like my mum, he said, "Not as a play, but it would be a great movie."
Yeah.
Colin Firth was the only person who has no great or hilarious anecdote. I literally rang his agent and said, "Can I have lunch with Colin? I'd like him to do the film." His agent said, "Yes." We met for lunch and Colin said, "I want to do a film." So thanks, Colin.
Yeah.
No, great anecdote.
And Helen and I, that's a cool one.
Helena was, she wanted to do the picture, but she was doing Harry Potter and was under total cast iron contract. But not taking no for an answer, I rescheduled the entire shoot with the help of my producers, so we worked on all the weekends. So I said, "Fine, we'll shoot with you on weekends." Then Harry Potter said, "Well, we're shooting outside, and it's November, and if it rains, we'll still need to shoot on the weekends." So basically, I took a bet against the English weather in late November, and still went for the weekends, and we got lucky. And she found herself one Sunday dressed as the Queen Mum, as I called action, without actually technically having said yes to me.
Awesome. And the I wouldn't call it, I guess, supporting cast, but the whole ensemble, which has been properly recognized this year, it's amazing. And I think that part of it shows the loyalty of your actors from previous productions,
Yeah.
Timothy Spalls and people that have come back to work, but also just how do you go about getting Derek Jacobi and Claire Bloom and Michael Gambon to...
It wasn't, I mean, there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't very, surprisingly, it wasn't very difficult. I mean, I think there is a great tradition in English cinema of great actors being willing to come on and do 2 or 3 scenes for not much money. Yeah. And I think it's a little different in America. I think it would be harder to assemble that level of star to do such small roles. But there's a great ensemble acting tradition, a company tradition in the UK. And I think they realised that although the line count was small, that they were playing up big iconic characters like King George V, Queen Mary, Winston Churchill, and that the challenge was kind of a tip of the iceberg storytelling challenge of creating a vivid sense of character with the only chance doing a few key sketches.
In some ways, it seems like the gods were smiling on this production with the Logue Diaries thing in particular. It's just unbelievable. And for people that don't know, maybe you can explain what just the ability to learn about this character so shortly before things came together, from what I understand.
Yeah, about 9 weeks before the shoot, my production son, Eve Stewart, tracked down the grandson of Lionel Logue, Mark Logue, living in London, 10 minutes from me. And in his attic, he had papers belonging to his grandfather, and in those papers was a handwritten diary account of the relationship between the king and his grandfather, Lionel Logue, which no one knew existed. No royal historian has ever seen, no member of the royal family has ever read. And this fell into our hands with 9 weeks to go, and it was like a treasure trove.
Just in terms of the first and the last scene, I believe that you've talked in other interviews about just the conscious way that the way you wanted to present Bertie in the first scene, as opposed to many other movies about monarchy, and then also with the last scene, it's the ending as it's shot is very different than the ending that was originally scripted, from what I've read, and also just the motivation behind those 2 decisions. I
think the ending was when he actually makes the speech, was a brilliant example of being alive to evolution on the day, because originally, Bertie just read the speech and Lionel Logue was standing there, and when we did the first take, kind of Jeffrey did that, and maybe, I could see him giving a little bit of encouragement, and I was like, that's interesting, do a bit more of that, and that evolved as we shot it into Jeffrey conducting and mouthing and smiling and really directing this performance out of Bertie, and then getting to that point where he becomes affected by the speech and Colin's taken off and he stops directing and he becomes the viewer, the listener, the audience. And in a way that scene of that speech is a parable in a way about you know, a director getting a performance from an actor. It's a scene about Logue getting a performance, and then that actor becoming so good that he ceases to need to direct.
Was there at some point this thing? This is just directly related. There was a script that he was essentially cured at the end at one point.
I mean, it was. I mean, there was still. I still remember even in the first draft, he said, you know, Churchill said he wasn't perfect, but by God, he knows how to speak. I think the more important evolution was the role of Logue. But I definitely think Colin was worse than the script implied, and even I thought he was going to be. I mean, he was quite brave. That he never really takes off, and I thought that was a very brave decision Colin took, which I embraced, because it does keep the jeopardy going throughout.
Well, thank you. Congratulations on the DGA award
Thank
and
you.
the Queen's endorsement. It's cool.
Thanks.
So,